Hey guys, welcome back to A Man Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, we're going through the captain and pod options to consider in round 3. Unfortunately, my webcam has died on me this evening, so you guys are just going to have to look at this video and not see my beautiful face. I know, what a shame, but let's get into the video. So this round really is tough in terms of the captain considerations. There's a lot of really good teams playing each other this round, such as the Panthers versus Storm, Rabbitohs versus Roosters, so it is tough to pick, some reliable captain options, but we'll try our best. So first up, I just haven't really considered anyone from the Storm or the Panthers, given the news that Nathan Cleary and Pappenhausen are out. I guess if you did want to go for someone from this game, you could look at someone like Cam Munster, but just knowing that these two teams are very, very solid defensively, it's hard to get a read of what kind of players are likely to shine. So I think it's safe to kind of avoid that game in general in terms of the captaincy. Given that it is the Thursday game, you could throw a vice captain on someone, saying if you wanted to take a punt on like a Jerome Luai or a Cam Munster. I think that's still a safe vice captain, but aside from that, I'm not really looking too hard at that game. First player that I've got to consider is Damien Cook coming up against the Roosters. Now, the reason that I've got Cookie here is that he really shone last week, and he was playing in wet weather conditions, but he really had a breakout game in comparison to his round 1 SuperCoach score. So coming up against the Roosters, they're actually the 6th worst team in terms of conceding points to hookers, which I found quite interesting. You'd always consider the Roosters to be one of the top defences, but that was a position that they did seem to be conceding the most kind of points. So potentially that means that someone like Damien Cook could exploit some kind of, quick runs out of dummy half and through the middle. So, if you think that he's going to back up that kind of performance that he did in round 2 against the Sea Eagles, he definitely could be a very decent kind of vice captain or captain option. He averaged about 59 points against the Roosters last season, which is not amazing, but I think I purely just put him here based on that kind of matchup in terms of how the Roosters have done in the 2020 season when defending the hooker position. And obviously Cook was really, really good last round, so I think he potentially could be a very punty kind of captain option. Next up, I have Tevita Pangai Jr. Now, this was definitely a punt option. I don't own Pangai Jr. myself, but I think if you do, this is one of those games where, it's the Broncos versus the Bulldogs, so either one on that team could do really well. I think Pangai Jr. could be one candidate. The reason I've got him as a strong candidate is the Bulldogs were the worst team last season at conceding points to front row forwards and second row forward. He's obviously coming off of 2 really great rounds. He's got 100 points last round, scoring that late try. And what he averaged against the Bulldogs, he had one game against them where he scored 114. So he has shown that last season he can go big against this particular opponent. And I think the potential recipe is there for him to have another big game, He's had some good form, SuperCoach-wise, coming into this game, and the way that the Bulldogs seem to concede against props, I think Tevita Pangai Jr. could do really well, and he could be a really kind of fun vice captain or captain option coming into this round. Obviously there is a bit of risk in that, but I think that's part of the fun with SuperCoach, having these kind of captaincy punts, if they do work for you, they can do, they feel really good. Next up, we have Dave Fifita, who I did recommend last week as a good vice captain option. Again, I think the matchup is there for him to do well in this game against the Cowboys, the 3rd worst team in terms of defending edge back rowers. And so I think Fifita, he showed last game what kind of damage he can do to weak edge defenses. And he'll be coming up against the Cowboys' right side defense, which is missing Carl Felt. So, the partnership between Isan Masters and the replacement winger, I just can't quite remember his name. Obviously, that could be something that someone like Dave Fifita could exploit. And so I think he could do really well against the Cowboys. Last year, he averaged 75 points against them, so still a very, very good base to kind of work off if you're thinking about how he had done previously against the Cowboys. And, he's coming off that great game last round. So I think Dave Fifita, the benefit, I guess, is that the Titans and Cowboys do play on the Sunday, so he could be a good captain option if you want to vice captain a player earlier in the round to make use of that vice captain loophole. Now, next up, it wouldn't really be a captain video if we weren't talking about James Tedesco. Now, I think, me personally, I think it's a very difficult decision, I think, this round in terms of the captain, so I think I'm likely to kind of just stick it on him, given that I just know that he's very reliable and very trustworthy. And I am going to that Roosters Rabbitohs game. I think it'd be really fun to cheer on. I am a Roosters fan. I think it'd be really fun to cheer on Tedesco when obviously I want the Roosters to do well in that game, and I want him to do well for my SuperCoach side. In terms of how Tedesco did against the Rabbitohs last season, he averaged 88 points against them, which is actually quite tremendous, given that in that blowout game in the last round of this last year, he scored still, I think 72 or 80 points in that, when the Roosters barely did anything. So I think that still shows that even if it is a tough game, I'll fully expect Tedesco to still rack up at least that 75 to 80 points. and obviously he started the season off with a bang, getting 162 and 111. In terms of how the Rabbitohs defend fullbacks, they're very, very good. You know, there's only a few other teams that are better at defending that position than them. Obviously, they've got really good kickers in their side, like Adam Reynolds. So you can fully expect, they might be making use more of the touch lines, going for kicks that go out of touch, just to reduce the kind of run backs that Tedesco can have. But the way that Tedesco has been playing in terms of the way he links up with Kiri in the actual attacking plays, not just running the ball back, I think he's still going to be heavily involved, and I could still expect him to do well, even if I wouldn't maybe really expect these kind of massive 100-point scores, but I still think he could be a good safe kind of 75 to 90-point scorer this round. And finally, the last kind of captain option I wanted to touch on was Mitch Barnett. Again, he also benefits in that that he plays on the Sunday game. And they are coming against the West Tigers, who really did not look good against the Roosters, and the Knights are coming in with some good form. And the way that Barnett is playing in terms of how his minutes are shaping up, he's playing 80 minutes on an edge, and that added benefit of the goal kicking. He started the season off really strong. He only averaged 53 against the Tigers last season, but that was without any goal kicking benefit, and I think that the way that he started, he could actually just be a very safe captain option who could bank you about 70 to 75 points this week, and he does benefit from playing on the later in the round, so you could put the captain on him and maybe vice captain, say Teddy, if you want to make use of the vice captain loophole. I think the Knights in general, the way that they're performing, there could be some other good candidates in there, say like Bradman Best, so I still think the Knights have good opportunities in this game and can definitely score very well. And I think Barnett, given that he's got that safety of being an 80-minute back rower, with goal kicking, he could be a very safe captain option this round. Now, next up, we'll move on to the pod patrol for round 3, looking at some key forwards who could be good pod options in the next few weeks. I kind of wanted to focus this on second row forwards, given that I think a lot of people this week will be looking to make changes in that position with Ryan Madison being injured, so I wanted to mainly focus on them. So the first one that I've got is Josh Jackson, who I have touched on in other videos. Priced at 439k, he's only currently owned by about 3% of the game, and he's coming off that massive game against the Panthers where he scored 75 in pure base. Put in the next 3 games for these forwards, but for guys like Josh Jackson, it doesn't really matter who the opponent is. Obviously, I would expect actually in those tough games against the Rabbitohs and the Storm, if he's just tackling his butt off, you can expect the base points to be really high. So I think he's a very steady, guaranteed kind of 55 to 60, maybe even the 65 point mark. And he does it all in base. He just rolls up his sleeves and gets the work done. So if you're a kind of no nonsense owner, you like that consistency, Josh Jackson could be a very good kind of mid-range second row forward option to be considering in the next few weeks. Next up, I think at the Knights, there's been a lot of talk obviously about Jaden Brayley, Bradman Best, Mitchell Barnett, but I feel like Tyson Frizell is not getting his just due. He has done really well to begin the season as well. He is obviously a little bit more expensive than Barnett, and the argument for Barnett is because he has got that goal kicking. But Frizell, in the 2 games that he's played, he's been playing the full 80 minutes, and he's got base of 56 and 58, which is very, very good for an edge back rower. Only owned by about 7% of the game, and again, he does benefit from the same easy draw that the obviously the other Knights players have, coming up against the Tigers and the Dragons and the Titans in the next 3 games. Now, what I do really like about Frizell is we saw how bad that Tigers edge defense was against the Roosters last week. Obviously, they have made some changes by dropping Joey Leilua, so I wouldn't quite expect it to be as porous as it was against the Roosters, but he does line up on that side of the field that would go up against that weak Tigers left edge defense. So he could be a really good shout this week in particular. But again, also against the Dragons, I think he could do very well. Coming up against his old side, I do really feel that narrative, a lot of players think about that when they come up against their old teams and they really want to have good performances. So I think these next 2 games, someone like Frizell could be a really strong kind of pod option, only owned by about 7%. So I think he's definitely someone to consider, if you don't, if say you could even do the double up of say going Barnett and Frizell. I don't think that's really a bad argument if you've say already had Barnett in your team. The Knights do have a fantastic draw, and I think the pair of them could do really well. And finally, I've got Isaiah Papali'i, who will be starting in Ryan Madison's edge role at least for the next round. We're not quite sure yet on what Madison's timeline is in terms of when he comes back from his injury, but Papali'i, he's shown really good promise even just coming off the bench. In his 2 games off the bench, he's played 64 minutes and 54 and got base of 54 and 50 points, which is really, really strong. And only owned by about 2%, he's definitely falls into that pod category. And the Eels do have good games, so playing on an edge, which he will be, there definitely is slightly increased potential for attacking stats. And when they've got easy games against Sharks, Tigers and Dragons, I think someone like Papali'i, especially given that with Madison these concussions, he potentially might be out for even more than a week. It could be 2 or 3 weeks, and then you could really have someone like Papali'i for that kind of the period that you want him for. So I think he becomes a good kind of pod mid-range second row forward. He's very similarly priced to Tupanua, so if you're not looking to go Tupanua, who obviously he himself is a pod, but I feel like he is being talked about quite a bit. But Papali'i, I think going a bit more under the radar in comparison to someone like say Tupanua, but I think he could be a really solid pod second row forward option. And finally, moving on to the pod patrol for the backs, I'll start off with Justin Olam. So obviously a lot of people this week are going to be looking to move on, say Charlie Staines, Jake Averillo, those guys who are kind of close to that 300k mark who just haven't really been performing well. And with the money created for say from going Madison to Barnett, a lot of people are trying to use that money to upgrade one of their centre wings. I think Justin Olam could be a great pod centre to look at to target in the next few weeks. Only owned by about 4% of the game, and he's coming off a really strong first 2 games, and he has got 2 really good games in those next 3. Obviously that game against the Panthers will be tough, and I wouldn't expect him to do as well as he has done in his past 2 games, but then he's got absolutely beautiful games against the Broncos and the Bulldogs. I think those are prime games where someone like Olam could benefit a lot. So I think if you really want to go kind of pod in your centre wing, and I think you want, especially if you want to get a piece of say the Melbourne Storm attack, obviously Raymond Smith is a little bit cheaper in your centre position, but I feel like Olam and that left side with Carr is probably their stronger side in terms of attacking. So I think someone like Olam could be a great pod centre. Similar to him would be Micah Sivo. I think Sivo, obviously he's very rocks and diamonds, his base is not quite as high as someone say like Olam. Olam, I didn't mention at the time, Olam, he averages a base of about, in his last few games he's got 28 and 36, which is quite strong, but for Sivo it's a little bit down on that. But what Sivo does have, obviously he has that amazing try scoring threat, and he's got really good games coming up against Sharks, Tigers and Dragons, and 2 of those are at Bankwest, where we know that Sivo does really well. So I think if you're looking to jump on a bit of a more high upside player, someone like Sivo could do really well for you. I had him at some points last season, and I had him in for that one game where he scored like 150, scoring 4 tries. So we know that the guy can go massive. And I think those games, Sharks and Dragons, especially at Bankwest, I think he could profit hugely. And so I think he becomes a very good kind of pod in that mid-range centre category. I think Sivo could be a good kind of punchy centre option. And finally, in my pod backs, I finally managed to get Ben Hunt in here. I talked about putting him in last week, but I've done it this week, probably a week too late, given that he is being discussed quite a bit. But he definitely still falls into that pod category, only owned by about 2%. He is dual listed, so you can pick him up in either hooker or at halfback. I think a lot of people will be mainly looking to target him at halfback, purely because he's got those 2 great scores in his the first 2 rounds of the season, and he's coming up against the Sea Eagles this week. So he's got that benefit of he'll definitely go up in value after this game, and he could also do well in terms of the points of this game too. So I know people potentially might be looking to, I wouldn't recommend it myself. I think holding Cleary is still probably the better outcome. But people who want to keep getting the points will do a move say from like Cleary to Ben Hunt, where they'll pocket the difference in price. Ben Hunt will go up in value. They'll take the points, and then move back to Cleary, which I don't think, it's not a horrible strategy. It just does use quite a lot of trades. So I think potentially with Cleary is a little bit, you just kind of have to weigh up the opportunity cost of that strategy. But Ben Hunt, I think it's really that next game against the Sea Eagles where you would be looking to get the points. Against the Knights and the Eels, they are definitely tougher games, but I still think that he could do well enough in that Manly game to make you some good coin over the next few rounds, and some decent points too, while you want to maybe bridge the gap until you can get back Nathan Cleary into your side. Well, that's it everyone. Those are the kind of the captain and pod options I wanted to run through for this round. In terms of how my team is shaping up, my main trade conundrum at the moment is Ryan Madison is definitely going to be going out of my team, but it's whether I do make the switch straight back to Angus Crichton, or if I instead go to say Mitch Barnett, save a bit of money there and also be able to capitalize on Barnett's price increase, and then look to move it to Angus in maybe either another week or 2. So that's kind of the main decision that I'm toying up with. And the other trade that I'm looking at is also then trying to get maybe someone like Ryan James into my side, and that would probably mean trading one of my cheap centre wings. Charlie Staines, I'm actually thinking of holding him now, just given that he is playing in a good side, and they've got a decent draw overall for the next few rounds. And I still think that, yes, his price will go down this week, but I have a feeling that if he just has to cross over for a couple of tries, his price will then start to swing back up. So I'm instead maybe potentially looking at trading out someone like, say, Fusus Tua or Jason Saab, and switching to Ryan James via some center wing duel. Those are my kind of trade thoughts at the moment. I think the Ryan James move will definitely happen. Just need to decide if it's, say, Fusus Tua or Saab. And the second row forward one, it just depends if I want to go straight back to Crichton or if I want to go to, say, with Barnett and then move to Crichton a little bit later in the season. But guys, that's the video completed. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, would really appreciate a thumbs up and like on the video. And please do consider subscribing to my channel, as I'll be continuing to put out videos throughout this 2021 SuperCoach season. But until then, see you guys in the next video.